This is the iPhone SE 3rd generation. Released March 2022 at $430 US, the SE has served as Apple's budget smartphone option for a number of years, and is only now finally about to be replaced by a 4th generation, likely by April, though as of making this video, the SE3 is still being sold brand new by Apple in early 2025. Regardless of when you're watching this and whether or not there's a new SE already released, the fact remains this phone here is already 3 years old, much of its hardware being far older than that, with the same design and build as the 2017 iPhone 8. In fact, all that's really changed is the A15 Bionic chipset and 5G networking, which thankfully does keep this phone relevant and very much usable today, even if there's a lot lacking in the camera department, and battery life can be very rough. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today I thought it would be a good time to take a look at the 2022 iPhone SE and tackle a few main questions. How does it hold up in 2025? Should current users be looking to upgrade? And for those on something older, could this phone even still be worth buying? Well, no, it's not worth buying, at least brand new, and I'll link my iPhone buying guide in the description if you're curious about the other options out there. If you are watching this video before the 4th Gen SE releases, definitely avoid buying this smartphone for $430. If you really can't wait for the new SE, I would recommend at least going to the $600 iPhone 14. It's a significantly better phone in practically every possible way. If you currently have an SE and are struggling with it, I would imagine battery life is likely a sore spot for you, or maybe you just want to get a phone with a bigger screen or an actually good camera. Whatever your concern, I do think it is worth upgrading, particularly with this new SE coming out. I'll have another link to a video in the description for more details about the SE4. If you're watching this and it's out already, that's going to be the phone to buy for most people, so I would highly recommend it. That said, if you're doing just fine on your SE as is and it's not giving you too much trouble, I mean sure, you might as well get as much life out of it as you can, but I would generally encourage you to upgrade if you can afford it and have a desire to. Don't get me wrong, this is not a bad phone, and in fact, far from it. If you for whatever reason either don't mind or even prefer the older home button design, there's a lot to like here. I mean, this is just a straight up modern iPhone running the latest version of iOS with hopefully at least a few more years of updates, and what we have here is completely capable of doing nearly anything the $1,000 plus iPhones can do. Sure, no Apple Intelligence, and you're definitely lacking a ton of new features, but the core experience remains the same, just in a much older, perhaps more familiar package. This is the perfect smartphone for your grandparents or anyone who just doesn't do a whole lot with their phone and needs something simple just for the basics. A faster iPhone than whatever they're currently using, perhaps, but one that won't actually feel different to use. Now, I will say it's much easier to get used to the gesture navigation system than you might expect, talking from personal experience getting some of my own grandparents on newer iPhones. But maybe you just like keeping things simple, or you're on a budget and don't really care for all the bells and whistles of something newer, and hey, fair enough if that's the case for you. If you do want this phone, it likely will go on sale and clearance a whole lot as Apple slowly stops selling them completely. But even then, I'm doubtful you'll be getting much of a deal when you could instead take a gander at the used market. If we turn to eBay.com to get an idea of the pricing, you may be surprised just how cheap these iPhones are now. Keep in mind, again, as of making this video, Apple is still selling this phone for a whopping $430 US. While on eBay, we can easily find SE 3rd gens in good condition for under $150, even close to $100 if you look around enough. The storage starts at 64 gigabytes, which should be enough for most users of this phone, but there's also 128 and 256 gig options if you would prefer that. There is a couple things to note if you do go this route. For one, make sure you are actually getting a 3rd Gen SE from 2022 and not the 2nd Gen SE from 2020. While the phones are extremely similar and cosmetically identical, the SE3 does have the A15 chip rather than the A13, which should equate to faster speeds and at least a couple extra years of software support in the long run. Second, I would highly recommend making sure you get a phone with a healthy battery. The reality is, the SE3, even since it launched, has never had good battery life, and if your battery degrades in health, as all smartphone batteries do when they're used over time, your experience may end up getting pretty rough, with potential slowdowns and inconsistent performance. You can check the battery health and settings under battery health, and once that percentage there is down to around the 80% mark or so, you may start to have some issues crop up, and you'll eventually get a note telling you your battery needs serviced. You can get a replacement battery through Apple for about $70, which quite frankly is probably not worth doing in my opinion. I'd rather just just take that money and put it towards a new iPhone, considering it's about half the value of the SE3 as is on the used market. If your battery is healthy, you might be doing okay. And again, if you're going to buy one of these, you definitely want one with a healthy battery. But even then, for those who use their phone for anything more than just the lightest of tasks, you'll probably want to keep a charger nearby. That battery life is probably the biggest concern of this phone in my eyes, at least assuming you're okay with the older home button form factor, of course. For a lot of people, that's the deal breaker right there. So to summarize here, the SE3 is not worth buying brand new unless you're getting one heck of a deal, and you should either instead turn to the used market or get the iPhone SE 4th generation if and when it's out, which it should be by April or so. This isn't a bad phone, it's just an intentionally older, more classic feeling experience, and while the battery life can be rough, the cameras are ancient, and the form factor is straight out of 2014, we're still looking at a device fully capable of running iOS and doing nearly anything you would want to do on an iPhone. So with that, let's just take a step back here and look closer at the phone itself to see how well it holds up in 2025. For some quick brief history, the first iPhone SE, standing for Special Edition, was memorable for reusing the design of the iPhone 5S, but containing the internals of the best iPhone in 2016, which was the iPhone 6S. It was the first time Apple had tried something like this, and it was a massive success, bringing back that smaller form factor, which was perfect for those not quite ready to move on to the larger iPhones at the time. Plus, this phone was amazing value, and I've got a video with some more history on all this if you're interested, as well as why the 3rd Gen SE is so disappointing in comparison, link in the description. Worth a watch after this video, but fast forward to 2020, and iPhones had once again seen a dramatic shift in design, with the removal of the home button starting with the iPhone 10. The final home button iPhones in the 8 and 8 Plus were getting older, and so Apple would just replace them outright with the 2nd Gen SE at $400, a phone that, unlike the first SE, changed absolutely nothing but the chipset, going from the A11 to the A13. They also would technically change up the color options a bit and centered the Apple logo. Then skip 2 years to 2022, and iPhones were now coming with 5G networking, something Apple wanted to include on their budget offering, hence likely the smallest upgrade of any iPhone we've ever seen in the SE 3rd generation, which now cost $430. Literally everything else carried over from the SE2, except now we had the A15 chip instead of the A13, and with that came 5G capabilities. Skip 3 more years and we come to today, with the exact same phone at the exact same price. Of course, it is going to be replaced soon with a newer, much nicer model, but even so, it is insane Apple has left this phone as is for so long. Still, taking the value proposition out of the picture, there is a lot to like here. The design is simple and oh so familiar, and for good reason. It is solid. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the iPhone 8's old design, or even going back to the iPhone 6 from the front. It was practical and functional, and the home button may not allow for an edge-to-edge display, but it still works just as well as the gesture navigation on modern iPhones. We also of course have Touch ID, which some people even now still prefer. This phone is quite thin, small, and very light. We're looking at a 4.7-inch LCD Retina display that's nowhere near as crisp or vibrant as the newer OLED panels on iPhones today, but it's sharp enough and very color accurate. It is a good screen, and it being fairly small makes this the final compact iPhone Apple may ever sell, at least for the foreseeable future, with the iPhone 12 mini and 13 mini being long gone by now. The build here is sort of a nice change of pace compared to the typically heavier, bulkier phones we're used to nowadays. The glass back and rounded aluminum frame makes for a phone that feels very comfortable in the hand and looks really nice to boot. We do of course have wireless charging, but no MagSafe, which is utterly absurd considering it came on the iPhone 12 nearly 5 years ago now. Just straight up laziness on Apple's part, as they didn't want to alter the physical design of the SE from the previous generation. We've got only 3 colors, white, black, and red, straightforward enough, and they all look great. You will probably want to use a case with this phone. I would say it's durable enough, but glass is glass and will crack when dropped the wrong way, so I would always recommend a case and screen protector to play it safe. On the bottom of the phone, we do have the Lightning port, of course, no USB-C here. We also do still have the physical SIM tray. Let's take a look at the cameras. On the front, we have the 7-megapixel selfie camera, and it takes fine selfies even if the sensor is nearly 8 years old. Turning to the back, we have this small little 12-megapixel wide camera lens. It feels real small compared to modern iPhones. And again, this is the exact same camera lens as we had in the 2017 iPhone 8. I cannot emphasize enough how crazy it is Apple is charging $430 for this. Thankfully, smartphone cameras 8 years ago were still pretty decent, and so this one is too, and it also benefits somewhat somewhat from the faster processing power and more robust computational photography. We have a portrait mode, for example, which the iPhone 8 never originally had with only its one lens. What we don't get is any sort of night photography, one of the most basic smartphone camera features out there and something Apple first brought in 2019 with the iPhone 11 line. Low light photos, and all photos really, do look a bit better from the 3rd Gen SE than they did from the iPhone 8 or even the SE2, but comparatively, these are still pretty pathetic and are blown out of the water by any other iPhone released within the last 4 years or so. I don't want to be too hard on this. The SE3 is good enough to take pictures for you, but only if you're not concerned about quality and are fully aware you could get far more reliable and consistently strong results with a different iPhone, even something like the iPhone 12, which came out in 2020. Now that being said, in ideal lighting conditions, the SE can still snap some nice photos, just like the iPhone 8 could back in 2017. It's the lower light scenarios where the problems quickly become much more apparent, but if it doesn't bother you, then in the very least, this is a phone still able to capture moments and memories as you need it to. Just temper your expectations and don't expect anything spectacular, and maybe take a few pictures at a time to make sure one ends up turning out. So that's photography. Quite outdated, but it might be able to get the job done for the right user. I'm someone who cares a little too much about my cameras to ever use something like this anymore, but I'm also not the audience for an SE to begin with. What this phone really brings to the table has nothing to do with the basic design or the cameras. It's the core iOS experience at a lower price tag, powered by the A15 Bionic chipset and 4 GB of RAM. While these specs are certainly aging now, given they were first seen in the iPhone 13 from late 2021, they're still quite powerful and provide spiffy performance in most circumstances. While this phone isn't really fast per se, and you may see some lag or hiccups here and there, you'll still be able to get the job done running practically any app or doing anything you might want to do on an iPhone. Heck, the iPhone 14 is barely more powerful than this phone, and that's really the only saving grace for the SE3 in 2025. The power is substantial and keeps it somehow relevant, despite that nearly 11-year-old design and 8-year-old hardware. There's nothing particularly special about the special edition iPhone, but it is still an iPhone, and one fully supported on iOS right now. I would guess it would receive another 2 to 3 to maybe 4 years of updates, so it's got a long life ahead of it, at least if your battery can actually keep up. And you don't end up giving in and buying a newer, nicer, and more modern iPhone. I don't hate this phone, even if I am a bit hard on it. It's frankly a great phone in a lot of ways because, again, it is an iPhone, and one that can do what iPhones can do, which alone makes it great, and an ideal experience for a lot of people out there. The problem has always boiled down to the value proposition. If this phone was $200 brand new, I'd be praising it as one of the greatest phones Apple's ever made, perfect for those on a budget and just don't need to do too much on their phone. But it's not $200. It costs $430, and it's cost that for 3 years now. I don't think it was even worth that price when it originally released, never mind 3 years later. Just because Apple is replacing the phone outright with a sleek new generation, and no doubt at pretty great value, doesn't override how badly they fumbled the ball with the 3rd Gen SE, a phone that could have been so much more. But again, I've done a video on that before already. At the end of the day, the iPhone SE3 is a solid smartphone in 2025, and it's still plenty usable. Just watch out for battery life. I wouldn't buy it anymore. It is pretty good value on the used market though. If this is something you're interested in, it's a good phone. As long as you're not paying too much for it, I'd really don't mind or even prefer that home button form factor. You also may end up wanting to upgrade sooner rather than later. You will have to move on sometime. Apple is done making these home button iPhones. And so with that, I think I'm also right about done here. Are any of you using the iPhone SE 3rd generation right now? How's it working for you? Is your battery doing okay? Make sure you let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video helpful or interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more tech content just like this. Thank you all so much for watching. I am Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.